In 1 month I lost my job, my husband, and my home. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me. My name is Ashley. I am 37 years old and I own a small bakery on the corner of Maple and Fifth that smells like vanilla and brown butter every morning before the city wakes up. And I have 2 7-year-old boys named Noah and Caleb who think I hung the moon. And I have a man in my life who showed me what it actually feels like to be chosen. But 14 months ago I was sitting on my mother's couch with a garbage bag of clothes at my feet, and 2 confused 4-year-olds pressed against my sides and absolutely nothing else. And I want to tell you how I got from there to here because I think someone listening needs to hear it. Let me take you back to the beginning. I had been married to my husband Ryan for 8 years. We met when I was 26 and he was 30 and we got married fast. The way you do when you're young and certain and haven't yet learned that certainty isn't the same as compatibility. We had the twins 2 years in. Noah came first and Caleb followed 40 minutes later, both of them screaming their arrival into the world with equal conviction, which I can tell you now has never really stopped. They were the best surprise of my life, and the thing that kept me in a marriage that had been showing cracks for longer than I wanted to admit. I worked as a marketing manager at a mid-sized company for 6 years. It was a good job. Not a dream job, but good, steady with decent pay and people I liked in a routine that worked around the boys' school schedule. I was good at it and it paid half our mortgage and I had no reason to think it was going anywhere. And then in September 14 months ago, my company announced a restructuring. That's the word they use, restructuring, when they mean that people who have given years of their lives to a place are going to be handed a box and walk to their cars. I was one of 11 people let go that day. My manager looked genuinely sorry. I told him it was okay because that's what you say, and I packed my desk into a cardboard box, and I drove home in the middle of the afternoon on a Tuesday thinking about how I was going to tell Ryan, and whether we had enough in savings to cover the mortgage for a few months while I found something new. I pulled into the driveway at 2:15 in the afternoon. Ryan's car was there, which was unusual because he worked until 6, but I didn't think much of it immediately. I assumed maybe he had come home sick or had a half day. I grabbed my cardboard box from the back seat and I unlocked the front door and I walked into my house. And then I stopped. There are moments in your life where time does something strange, where everything slows down and your brain takes a photograph of what it's seeing before your heart has caught up to what it means. I stood in the doorway of my own house with my cardboard box in my arms, and I took in the scene in front of me in slow, complete detail. Shoes by the door that weren't mine and weren't Ryan's. A jacket over the back of the chair. 2 glasses of wine on the coffee table at 2:15 in the afternoon. And Ryan coming out of the hallway with that particular expression of a person who has been caught so completely that the first response isn't denial but just a kind of naked, terrible stillness. I put the cardboard box down on the floor very carefully. I don't know why I did it carefully. Some part of my brain was apparently still functioning on the principle that things should be handled with care, even when everything was falling apart. "Ashley," he said. I didn't say anything. A woman appeared in the hallway behind him, younger than me, in one of my husband's shirts, with the specific uncomfortable expression of someone who wants very badly to be somewhere else. I looked at her for a moment and then I looked back at Ryan and I said, "How long?" It wasn't a question. It was the only thing I could think of to say. He said 6 months. He said it quietly, looking at the floor, and I stood there in the doorway of the house I had lived in for 5 years with my cardboard box of desk things at my feet, and I thought about the last 6 months. The late nights. The distracted dinners. The way he had stopped reaching for me and I had told myself he was tired. We were both tired. We had 2 small boys and 2 demanding jobs, and tired was just what life felt like now. I had explained away every single sign because the alternative was too large to look at directly. I asked her to leave. She left. Ryan tried to talk and I told him to stop, and I went upstairs and I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time without moving. The next 3 weeks were the worst of my life. Ryan moved out within the first week, or rather I told him to go and he went, which was the one thing he did without argument. What followed the argument was the mortgage. Our house was financed jointly and Ryan's position very quickly became that he wasn't going to continue paying for a house he wasn't living in. And without my job I couldn't cover it alone, and our savings, which I had believed were healthier than they were, turned out to have been quietly drained over the preceding months in ways I was only now beginning to understand. The bank was patient for exactly as long as banks are patient, which is not very long, and within 3 weeks of losing my job I knew I was going to lose the house too. I called my mother on a Wednesday evening. Her name is June and she is 62 years old. and she has never once in my life made me feel like coming to her was anything other than exactly the right thing to do. I told her everything, the job, Ryan, the woman in my house, the mortgage, all of it. And she was quiet for a moment and then she said, "Pack what you need for you and the boys. I'll have the guest room ready by Friday." I packed 4 garbage bags and a box of the boys' toys and I drove to my mother's house and I sat on her couch and I let myself fall apart for exactly 1 weekend, because that was all the time I felt I could afford. And then on Monday morning Noah climbed into my lap at 6:30 and put his small hands on either side of my face and said, "Mommy, are you sad?" And I looked at him and then at Caleb watching me carefully from the doorway with his cereal bowl in both hands, and I said, "I was, baby. But I'm okay now." And I meant it enough to start making it true. My mother's house smelled like cinnamon and dish soap and the particular warmth of a place that has always been safe, and for the first 2 weeks I did very little except apply for jobs, help the boys with their routines, and try to sleep through the nights which were long and loud in my head even when the house was quiet. I sent out applications every day. I updated my resume. I did everything you're supposed to do when you lose a job, and I did it with the mechanical determination of someone who knows that stopping is not an option when 2 small people are depending on you entirely. But something else was happening at the same time, quietly and almost without my noticing. My mother baked. She had always baked. It was the rhythm of her house, the background music of every memory I had of growing up there. Saturday mornings were cinnamon rolls. Birthdays were layer cakes that took 2 days to make. Winter evenings were cookies that she let me cut into shapes with cutters she kept in a tin that I still have. Baking was her language of love, and I had grown up fluent in it without ever fully realizing it. The first time I baked in her kitchen after everything happened was a Thursday afternoon about 2 weeks in. The boys were at school and I had sent 3 applications and stared at my laptop until my eyes hurt, and I needed to do something with my hands. I made a lemon cake from memory, a recipe my mother had taught me when I was 8 years old, simple and reliable and good. And when I took it out of the oven, the smell of it hit me somewhere deep and specific, like a door opening to a room I had forgotten existed. My mother came home from her errands and found me at the kitchen table with flour on my shirt, and the cake cooling on the rack, and she stood in the doorway and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You used to do that when you were little," she said. "When you were upset about something you'd come in here and bake until you felt better." I hadn't remembered that. But as soon as she said it, I knew it was true. I kept baking. Every day a little more. Trying recipes I had saved on my phone and never made. Experimenting with flavors. Filling my mother's kitchen with things that made the boys' eyes go wide when they came home from school. Noah turned out to have very strong opinions about frosting ratios, which I found both exhausting and deeply charming. Caleb liked to sit on the counter and watch, asking questions about every step with the focused seriousness of a small scientist. They were the best taste testers I have ever had, and they told me so regularly. About a month in, my mother sat down with me after the boys were in bed and she said, "Ashley, I want to talk to you about something and I need you to hear me out before you say no." I said okay. She pushed an envelope across the table. Inside was an amount of money. Not enormous, but significant money she had been saving for years in a quiet account I hadn't known about. She said, "This is yours. I want you to use it to open the bakery." I stared at her. "Mom, let me finish," she said, in the tone she has used since I was 4 years old. That means she is not negotiating. "You have been baking since you could reach the counter. You have been talking about having your own place since you were 12 years old and made that birthday cake for your cousin that everyone said was better than the one from the actual bakery. You are good at this, Ashley. You are really good at this. And you have nothing left to lose and everything to build." I cried. Not sad crying, the other kind, the kind that comes when someone sees you so clearly and so completely that the only response is to completely fall apart. My mother handed me a dish towel because she never has tissues, and that has always been her way, practical and warm at the same time, and she sat with me until I was done. I said yes. The next 2 months were the hardest and most alive I have ever felt simultaneously. I took the money and I started looking for a space, something small, something affordable, something that could become what I was seeing in my head. I looked at 6 different properties and none of them were right, and then a friend of a friend mentioned a space on Maple Street that had just become available, a small storefront with a decent kitchen and good light and a landlord who was apparently reasonable. His name was Daniel. He was 41 years old and he had owned that building for 6 years, and he met me there on a Tuesday morning to show me the space with paint on his hands from a project He had apparently come from directly and he apologized for it, and I said it was fine, and he showed me around with this quiet, unhurried manner that I noticed immediately because I had spent years around a man who made everything feel pressured and urgent. The space was exactly right. I knew it within the first 5 minutes. And the rent he quoted me was low enough that I asked him twice if he had said it correctly. "You're just starting out," he said simply. "It doesn't make sense to charge you full rate until you're on your feet." I looked at him for a moment. "You don't know me," I said. "I know you drove across town 3 times to look at this space before you called me," he said. "And I know you came in here and looked at that kitchen first before anything else. That tells me enough." I signed the lease that week. What followed was 3 months of building something from nothing, which is simultaneously the most exhausting and most satisfying thing I have ever done. Daniel showed up on the first Saturday with 2 friends and a truck full of equipment and spent the day helping me move things and fix what needed fixing, and he did it without making it feel like a favor I owed him, which mattered more than I knew how to say at the time. He came by regularly after that, to check on the progress, to fix a shelf that wasn't level, to stand at the counter and eat whatever I was testing that day with honest and useful opinions. We were careful with each other. Both of us had histories that had taught us to be careful. But somewhere around the 2nd month, on an evening when the boys had fallen asleep in the back of the shop after a long day of helping me set up and Daniel and I were sitting on the floor drinking tea from paper cups surrounded by boxes and half-assembled shelving, he looked at me and said, "You've built something real here, you know." I looked around at the half-finished space and then back at him and said, "It's not finished yet." "I know," he said. "I meant you." I opened the bakery on a Saturday morning in April with my mother standing behind the counter next to me and Noah and Caleb in matching aprons that my mother had made them, standing very seriously at the display case like the world's smallest and most enthusiastic sales team. We had a line out the door by 9 o'clock. I sold out of everything by noon. I sat in the back after the last customer left and I put my face in my hands and I let out a sound that was somewhere between laughing and crying, and my mother came back and sat next to me and put her arm around my shoulders and didn't say anything at all. Daniel came by that evening after close. I had saved him a slice of the lemon cake, my grandmother's recipe, the one that had started all of this, and he ate it standing at the counter while I counted the register, and he said, "Same time next Saturday?" I looked up at him. "I'll be here," I said. And I was. And so was he. And 14 months later he still is, and so am I, and the bakery smells like vanilla and brown butter every morning, and my boys think I hung the moon, and some Tuesday mornings when the light comes in through the front window at just the right angle and Noah and Caleb are doing their homework at the corner table and Daniel is fixing something in the back that always seems to need fixing, I think about the woman who drove home with a cardboard box on a Tuesday afternoon and walked into a life that was falling apart. And I want to say thank you to her. For not stopping. For getting back up on Monday morning when Noah put his hands on her face. For saying yes to her mother across a kitchen table. For signing that lease. She did good.